Hello, everyone, and welcome to Promethean Secular Frontier. This is Secular Soapbox, a show where we have strong opinions from a secular perspective, and we are not afraid to share them. I'm Bryce Aroni, and I'm here with today's co-host, soon-to-be host, Josh the Archon. He's kind of the mastermind behind this whole project. And we are going to be interviewing, well, first of all, we're going to be discussing ancient language. And so you kind of have an intimate familiarity with that, being a archaeologist and anthropologist yourself, Josh. But we're also going to bring in another Josh, who is our guest tonight, Dr. Josh Bowen. Dr. Josh graduated from Johns Hopkins University with a Ph.D. in Assyriology, and he is going to be talking to us about Sumerian and Akkadian cultures. And I have to apologize, everyone, for starting a bit late. And I also have to apologize for me ducking out early. I'm kind of in the midst of a passing hurricane remnants, and my basement is flooding. So I will have to intermittently take care of that. But I've got Josh the Archon here, who's got some wonderful questions for Dr. Josh. So it's going to be a Josh on Josh battle. You guys ready for this?
Let's go.
All right. And actually, Dr. Josh, welcome aboard. Thanks for doing this.
Cool.
As always, we appreciate your knowledge and your insight and your doctorness. And I don't know how else to say that. Your education in this field of study in ancient cultures, and of course, you are something of an Old Testament scholar, at least compared to the rest of us, and well known now for your book, Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 1, I believe. Mm-hmm. It's actually the small one in the bottom right. But also some of these other languages, learning to pray in a dead language, which we'll probably talk a little bit about today, and learn to read ancient Sumerian. And actually, I'll start off with the first question, and then I'll turn it over to Josh. But I'm curious, what's important about the Sumerian culture? First of all, what is the Sumerian culture, and what is the Akkadian culture? And because I'm sure if you ask the average American, they're not going to know where that was or even when that was. So those of us who are not academics, ancient Sumeria, where was that and when was it?
Yeah, that's one of those questions that could be very, very complicated. But I'll try to keep it higher level. So all those Assyriologists that are out there that are waiting to tear me apart for saying something too generic, just everybody relax, So we're talking about ancient Mesopotamia, which is ancient Iraq and Syria. And essentially, it's the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So, there was a book written by Kramer back in, I think, the 60s called History Begins at Sumer.
Not Kramer, Seinfeld, but a different Kramer, obviously.
Right, yes. Giddy up. This is where writing was invented. It's in this, cradle of civilization, they call it. So the first written language that we have, there's some debate about whether, it was Sumerian, but it seems like, I think we've got pretty good evidence that it was, is the Sumerian language from the mid-late 4th millennium BCE. So way, way back, 6,000 plus years ago is when writing was invented. And that Sumerian,
or just in that area?
In that area, yeah. And then very shortly thereafter, it's invented in Egypt, or it's invented. They develop it as well in Egypt. But we won, right? I mean, sorry to say, Mesopotamians got it. So, Okay.
Got to represent Mesopotamia.
That's right. We bring it. So Sumerian was originally developed for economic reasons. It wasn't developed as like this beautiful literary language. It was used to talk about sheep and goats and the transfer of commodities and those sorts of things. But then eventually, writing, we can go into whatever detail you want about that. But, writing developed in such a way that it could then be used not just to write economic or administrative texts, but it could be used to write literature. It could be used to write, what would be considered early scientific style texts.
Like astrology, right?
Yeah, I mean that sort of thing. It's a type of list development that we see. So and again we can go into some detail about that. But Sumerian was used for that purpose, or in that vein. But right around the middle of the third millennium, we get a different language. Now, the thing about Sumerian, it's called a language isolate, which means that it's not part of any language family. So, if you think about the Hebrew language, Hebrew is related to Arabic, is related to Akkadian, is related to, I mean, they're all, Yiddish is a little sort of, it's a little different, I guess, but it's all part of this. They call it the Semitic language family. So if somebody's anti-Semitic, that's where that word is, comes from. So Sumerian isn't like that. Sumerian is its own thing. We don't know any other language that's related to it. Of course, that, makes it quite susceptible for people saying, aliens, right? But not aliens.
People really
not aliens, everybody. Oh yeah,
that a really
that's a huge
serious belief, or is that
just
big time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Lots of people.
Just like the ziggurats, for instance, those were created by ancient aliens that wanted to help us learn agriculture.
I know movies. This is a trope in movies and Stargate and all that, but I didn't know that this was like real
it's a thing. It's a thing.
You haven't seen Ancient Aliens, my friend?
Yes, and I dismissed it as another
as well you should. As well you should.
So yeah.
I'll say one brief thing about it that frustrates me about the whole Ancient Aliens thing is that whether people realize it or not, so much of what undergirds it or motivates it is this idea that those people weren't smart enough to do that stuff, which is just so ridiculous. We don't know how to do it, so obviously they couldn't. I mean, it's just so, it's such a bigoted position to take. Look, people can be smarter than you. Yep. Oh, man. Megan, by the way, has a great video where she responds to one of those Ancient Aliens videos. And I wanted to spin off, because she got pretty angry in it, or frustrated. And I wanted to spin off a show where Megan would drink while she would look at Ancient Aliens videos, and we call it Megan Gets Pissed. But it never went anywhere. But yeah, so Sumerian's a language isolate, but Akkadian, the other language that starts to show up in the third millennium, is not a language isolate. It is a Semitic language. So Akkadian is related to Hebrew, related to Arabic, Aramaic, all these other languages. And so what that means is, because we know a lot about Akkadian, like grammatically and the vocabulary and those sorts of things, Sumerian and Akkadian became very closely intertwined. Not that one morphed into the other or something, but they were used in conjunction with one another. So much so that we have bilingual texts that we can use, scholars have used, to get at some of the grammar and the syntax and the meaning of individual lexemes, vocabulary words, in Sumerian. So oftentimes when, like in my book, Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian, a lot of the stuff that we know about Ancient Sumerian grammar and syntax is through Akkadian. So that's important to recognize.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So you're saying that you were able to correlate Akkadian with Sumerian in a sense in order to understand what was written within the Sumerian Sanskrit in a sense.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Rosetta Stone. It's not one Rosetta Stone that allowed us to, to translate a language that we didn't have access to otherwise. But like we have these bilingual texts, lots and lots of bilingual texts, and some of them are bilingual grammatical texts. And I could talk about that because we see them in scribal education context, which is what I wrote about in my dissertation. Right. So yeah, I mean, you can look at these Akkadian verbal forms, all these different verbal forms that get listed out, and then they have their Sumerian counterparts. And so it's like it doesn't always work because sometimes it's a later grammatical text, but we can learn a lot from it. So.
But does it also matter the time or the era that it's written in? Because wouldn't the Neo-Babylonians be different from the Akkadians in themselves? And
so that's right. Sorry, go ahead.
No. It's you. I was apologizing to you because I was talking over you. My apologies.
No, not at all. So Sumerian died as a language sometime around the end of the third millennium. Some people think it's a little later, some people think it's a little earlier, but it's right around the end of the third millennium, beginning of the second millennium. Now, that means that it died as like the mother tongue of any group of people. But that doesn't mean that it stopped being used. It was sort of like Latin in that sense. So scribes in scribal schools probably, almost certainly still spoke it, but it was in a very restricted elite context. And certainly in liturgical contexts, it was still spoken and sung. And again, it's the other part of what I wrote in my dissertation. But so Sumerian ends up getting it's the primary religious / liturgical language that persists down into God. I think the last cuneiform document that we see is 75 AD, and I think that's an Akkadian text, but it goes down well into toward the end, certainly into the Seleucid period.
This sounds very similar. Really interesting. This sounds very similar to how the Catholic Church now uses Latin and how they pray Latin at the Vatican, and probably, I haven't been to a Catholic church in a long time, but when I do remember them chanting non-English. I'm assuming it was Latin, and it's clearly a dead language at this point, but it's still used in that circle, and presumably they can all understand it and it has meaning. So is that a similar thing that was going on in this?
Yeah, that probably, except for the last part, presumably they can all understand it. So I don't know about the Catholic Church. Obviously I don't have any expertise in that, but I wouldn't be surprised, given what we know historically, that a lot of the people that actually pronounce the Latin know it at a very cursory language. At a very cursory level. I'm sure some of them have expertise where they can all understand it, but it wouldn't surprise me if the actual practitioners, the actual speakers, didn't actually understand what they were saying in full, and certainly the parishioners, I would imagine, don't understand in many cases what's being said, at least to a high degree. And the same thing is true with Sumerian. So, and again, is part of what I wrote my dissertation on. So Sumerian, because it became this liturgical language and was used to, at least in part, to transmit these liturgies, the people that copied out the text knew Sumerian and could understand it. And probably, I think, the priests that sung the liturgies understood it. But I don't know for how long. And what ends up happening is, in the same way that, you can, give you an example. I memorized when I was 5 years old or 6 years old, I memorized the Korean first verse, the first verse of the Korean version of Angels We Have Heard on High. And I could still sing it today. Chun sa do re na re ga, right? I can sing it. It's been how many years? I have no idea. If I didn't know that it was
Ladies and gentlemen,
if I didn't know,
Dr.
yes,
Josh Bowen.
the many hidden talents. Oh my gosh! But if I didn't, if I didn't know that it was angels, that I can't tell you the specific words, and because that's not the relevant part. The relevant part of that is that the gods understand me, right? And that's really, I think, the key to this. And so in
a sense, it's like a language of the gods in a sense. So you are actually communicating in a certain extent towards a godlike level or an intermediary language between gods and men.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way of saying it, because and there are anthropological, Josh, I'm sure there are like anthropological studies that talk about this sort of thing where people that are praying, I'm trying to remember because I had one of these studies that I wrote about in the dissertation, but it was a tribe that they discovered that a lot of the times they were like mispronouncing the words, and sometimes that was because of they had the wrong inflection, in the wrong part of the word, but it wasn't relevant. That wasn't they discovered that wasn't relevant. Because the gods could understand them. And so the same thing is true, I think, in some respects here, where it didn't matter so much that the audience could understand the ritual, or even, I think, ultimately, maybe the practitioner could understand it. The relevant part was that they were saying the words, and those words were imbued with power. And so by keeping the ritual and by going through the motions, it was
the Pledge of Allegiance.
That's a really good comparison.
To the flag. I don't know what this means. I'm supposed to say it every day, and to the republic for which it stands. Is that not like that? That's what you reminded me of when you're talking about.
Yeah, that's actually a very good comparison.
Yeah, I think so. And there's an example where you still technically understand the language, but how many, 8, you're like, my daughter's 8, does she know what indivisible means? Liberty and justice? Like, no, I mean,
I just found out.
But that's the neat thing, I think, about learning the language, like something like the Sumerian language, is that one of the things that, and this is part of the conclusion of that book, Learning to Pray in a Dead Language, is so often when people talk about Sumerian, the first question that comes up, like, why are we talking about this? So what? And when I applied for the Fulbright scholarship, I had to write about this because they weren't, like, nobody was going to be interested in my dissertation topic if I didn't make it relevant to that Fulbright board. And so one of the things that became clear is that the liturgies that were formulated at the end of the third millennium, beginning of the second millennium, and they were more free form. They weren't set. They weren't canonized until the late second millennium and into the first millennium. But by the time we got there to the first millennium, they had become standardized, quite standardized. And that tradition of liturgies affected, sometimes to greater, sometimes to lesser degrees, the mythology and liturgical practice, I think, aspects of the Hebrew Bible. And once you make that connection, once you see mythological texts and liturgical texts affecting the Hebrew Bible, well, now it's very relevant, to people in the West and in Western civilization. So, yeah, I think it's actually really important to be able to at least have a working knowledge. It can be very useful to have a working knowledge of that language.
I completely agree. And I think that the more that you see that there was a sense of maybe borrowing. I wouldn't necessarily say borrowing, but I would say that there would be hearkening back to a later language, which it kind of originated from. And I think that in itself really does show to people in general that I was about to say Hebrew. I was about to make that mistake. That the Israelite language in itself is not an original sort of seldom language. It's borrowed from plenty of different languages together, brought into one language. Like, as you stated, Latin, for instance, which is the closest one that we can see the relevancy today within the clergy. So I completely agree with you on that aspect. And I think that was a really good way to write your dissertation, is by hearkening back to that to say, no, this is completely relevant. Yeah. We shouldn't forget this.
Yeah.
We should see this.
Yeah. And this is what's, because you mentioned it, like using the word borrowing, because I mean, like in a certain sense, it's borrowing, but it's the example that I always give is Eminem, and he's just, one of the many rappers that does this sort of thing, but he's a favorite of mine. So, but that, if you think about the way that he uses Joan Jett's "I Love Rock and Roll," he reused major sections of that song,
right,
in his song "I Love You." I don't remember the actual title, but it's "I Love You Because You Remind Me of Me." And you can hear it. I mean, anybody that knows Joan Jett's song, they could hear it very, very clearly. But that doesn't in any way take away from what Eminem did. And it didn't mean that he was dumb because he utilized earlier work and reworked it for his own purposes. It actually shows, I think, artistic genius, right?
Exactly, an ingenuity in a sense, in order to take something that was prior to what he was writing in lyrical with his lyrics, and then bringing in a new sort of refurbishing of an old song. In a sense, I completely agree with you. That doesn't mean that he's stupid for doing that. It just means that he had a lot of imagination, in a sense, in order to do it, in ingenuity.
And we see this sort of stuff. I mean, if we're gonna, this is where I sort of sometimes push back on atheists and skeptics to say, look, let's not go overboard here. I understand, I completely understand that because so many fundamentalists and Christian apologists want to hold up the Hebrew Bible and say, look at this handed down from on high, perfect text that was written in a vacuum, even though they might not say it, that's what they're implying, and that it's so much better than anything else. Then you want to react to that and say, well, this is written by goat herders, right? Bronze Age goat herders. Well,
I never agreed with that statement in the first place, because already for you to write, you had to be of higher echelon during that time period in order for you to be a scribe. You couldn't just be some goat herder writing something down on, let's just say, skins, animal skins, and say, this is what I've written. No, that's not how it worked.
And even that phrase bothers me because it implies something about people that did animal husbandry, right? It's something that you should not be implying about them. And this is so one of the things that I like to point out is that this type of intertextuality between, say something like the Enuma Elish, the creation story about Marduk, and what we see in something like Genesis 1,
right,
or other parts of the Hebrew Bible, utilizing another text to do this sort of reworking for your own purposes was not unique to the Hebrew Bible in any way. The example that I like to give the most, because I think it's the clearest, is to go one step back from that text, the Enuma Elish, and go back to the Anzu myth. And I don't know if, Josh, I don't know if you know this, but I'll do it very briefly.
Oh, no.
But for the audience, I think this is actually really interesting. So there are two Akkadian texts, and they're both written by, the same culture, right? Just in different periods. And the Anzu myth is a story about the Anzu bird who is charged with guarding the cella of one of the top deities, Enlil. And Enlil is this top deity that holds this thing called the Tablet of Destinies. And if one holds the Tablet of Destinies, he can, it's like holding one of the power stones, or maybe all the power stones. I don't know. You control reality, right? So I guess it'd be the reality stone. You control nature, those sorts of things. And so Enlil takes a bath one day and puts his Tablet of Destinies along with his other regalia like on this throne, and the Anzu bird runs in and grabs the Tablet of Destinies and flies off into the mountains. Everything falls apart because now this usurping ruler kind of guy, the Anzu bird, has stolen this Tablet of Destinies. Now he can control reality. All the gods are thrown into turmoil. They try to pick different gods to go out and fight against the Anzu bird, and they're all too scared. Well, finally, this young warrior god named Ninurta is convinced to go out and do it. And they go out, and they have this fierce fight, and they all get really tired. And Ninurta pulls out his bow and shoots an arrow at Anzu. And Anzu holds up the Tablet of Destinies and commands the arrow to go back to its thicket. Right. Okay. And it's so, well, he controls, nature. And so the arrow that's made out of wood turns away. And so he can't kill him. Okay. So now Ninurta's in a bit of a bind. What do I do? So he sends his mace, his trusty talking mace, back to the god Ea, who is the clever deity. Right. And Ea comes up with this plan, as he always does. And so the plan is that they're supposed to wrestle again, fight, and when Anzu bird gets tired, he'll lower his wings. And when he does, Ninurta is supposed to cut off the pinions, those real long feathers. And as they float away from him, he'll take the Tablet of Destinies and call them back to himself.
Interesting.
At that moment, he's supposed to fire the arrow, and the feathers that are part of the fletching of the arrow will also come back to him and kill him. Right? It'll bring the arrow. Okay. So the point is that's what happens. And so that's the Anzu myth. So things to key in on there. It's a real struggle because the Tablet of Destinies gives Anzu this great power, and he doesn't beat him at first, and he has to use trickery to beat him. It's not by his might that he does it.
Right.
Okay. Well, fast forward to the end of the second millennium when we start to see this Enuma Elish story about Marduk. There's this brilliant article, and I can't for the life of me remember who wrote it, but it's probably Lambert. But it's talking about how Marduk is Ninurta brought back to life.
Interesting.
So if you read through the Enuma Elish now, you'll see things that jump out at you. For example, if everybody, just so everybody knows the story, Tiamat is, after some stuff happens in the beginning, Tiamat gets really upset because Marduk is he's a real raucous young fellow. And so she decides she's going to destroy all the gods. And she sets up this consort of hers, Kingu, and gives him the Tablet of Destiny. So automatically you see the connection there.
Exactly.
So Kingu's got the Tablet of Destinies. You've got these, other monsters that she creates. And Marduk, that we have the same setup. 3 different gods go out to try to fight against Tiamat and turn away terrified. Same thing that you see in the Anzu myth.
Wow.
Then you have the young warrior god. Instead of Ninurta, now it's Marduk. The difference is that Marduk volunteers to go. Ninurta had to be convinced.
Right. So there is a bit of a change
Marduk
within the story.
That's right. And it
Yeah.
shows Marduk to be even braver and even more powerful. Well, then when Marduk goes out, if anybody knows the story, like they might think, who the hell is Kingu? I mean, I know Tiamat, because that's who it's all about, right? Marduk versus Tiamat. Who's this Kingu guy? There's a reason that you don't know about him. Because Marduk, as he approaches to fight, he's still at a distance, but just his approach kills Kingu.
Whoa.
So there's no fight between them. There's no battle between them. Just his approach like takes Kingu out. The guy that's holding the Tablet of Destinies, the thing that made Anzu so powerful, just his approach defeats him. So when you think about a comparison between Ninurta, who had to fight and fight and fight and couldn't win and had to trick him, Marduk, who's the new Ninurta, man, his approach defeats him. Right. So at any rate,
that's crazy.
And these are not, just so everybody knows, these are not just general thematic connections. There are actual linguistic phrases that are exactly the same. For example, one of them, I'll just tell you one.
Sure.
In the Anzu myth, the text says to let the feathers of Anzu blow through the air back to the gods, so that they, to proclaim your victory, because you've killed this bird and let his feathers blow back.
Right.
Well, then in Enuma Elish, after he kills Tiamat and cuts open her veins and lets the blood run, it's really gross. Anyway, it says, let her blood blow in the wind back to the gods. Right? And it's wait a minute. The blood blow in the wind? The hell does that even mean? Well, the writer is trying to use the language to make the reader and listener understand there's this direct connection between these two texts. And so it shows up in this thing that like it's there's a word for it that's I'm blanking on it now, but there's a type of intertextuality that you can rest assured that it doesn't I can't remember, it's like some sort of a fossilized thing, but anyway, where it doesn't make sense in the new context. It doesn't fit. Blood flowing through the air, blowing through the air like that doesn't work.
Exactly.
Like others do. And there's a bunch of those. But the point is that there's this direct intertextuality between these two texts. But nobody would accuse the writer of the Enuma Elish of being like dumb or not creative. I mean, he's very creative.
Absolutely.
And so, I think that, so we have to bear that in mind when we then see intertextuality between Akkadian and Sumerian texts, ancient Near Eastern texts in general, even Egyptian stuff or Ugaritic stuff in the Hebrew Bible. They're not dummies. They're not like being lazy and stealing stuff or plagiarizing. They're reworking it for their own purposes.
Exactly. And I think also, and please, if I am wrong, please correct me, but would you think too that there is that they want some sort of connection back with those original writers in a sense? Like during, let's just say, when the Enuma Elish was written, around when would you say that the Enuma Elish was written around?
It's tough to know. I mean, I think most scholars, like certainly Lambert, I think would say end of the second millennium, right around 1200 maybe. It's hard to know without finding like early copies, lots of early copies of it. But I mean, it does seem like it's probably around the end of the second millennium.
Oh, interesting. Because it seems that was during the time of the Akkadian Empire, in a sense. If I'm based on that.
So just so everybody in the audience knows what we're talking about. So the old Akkadian Empire runs, the middle of the end of the third millennium, with Sargon of Akkad and, his grandson Naram Sin are sort of the two big names everybody pulls out of there. And then you end up with the Amorite dynasties taking over in Babylonia. So you have like Hammurabi of Babylon is the big one that everybody knows about. What? But so you have this old Babylonian empire, but then in the second half of the second millennium, you start to see this Middle Assyrian empire start to develop during the Amarna period. We see it sort of in action there, and there are periods of expansion and contraction of this Assyrian empire. The Assyrians are for everybody in the audience, up in northern Mesopotamia, whereas the Sumerians and then later the Babylonians are down in the south. But there's this sort of expansion and contraction when they're more powerful and then when they're weaker. But then by, starting to get into like the first quarter of the first millennium, and then really it starts to really develop in the 8th century under Tiglath-Pileser III. Like the Neo-Assyrian Empire blows up, right? They're hot shit at that point.
Oh, yeah, big time.
That Assyrian Empire, it kind of goes through its, highs and lows, but that's right. It would have been during the Middle Assyrian period.
Right. But wouldn't the linguistics though kind of wish to connect with the old greatness of that particular empire as well, right?
Yeah,
so in a sense, it's kind of like hearkening back to a greater time.
And we see that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. It's fine. I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that I think people need to just recognize. There's a really good book about that, recent book. It's not my area of expertise, but I could talk a little bit about it. But it's really important for people to recognize that the antiquity of something in the ancient world was really, really important because it gave it this validity, right? It gave it this importance. So when you see things like during the Ur III period or during the early second millennium, so late third millennium and then early second millennium, they start hearkening back to these early third millennium, sometimes legendary kings, right? So Gilgamesh and Lugalbanda, and
exactly.
That's important because they're pulling from these earlier dynasties, these earlier at that point again had become sort of legendary kings because of their antiquity, and that continues on. So then when you see something in the Hebrew Bible where they go back to that, they start talking about the primeval history, Genesis 1 through 11, and they're going back, right? Like, it's not that these books, these parts of the Pentateuch were written during these ancient periods or something.
Right.
No, I mean but it's important to have that origin, that connection to the origins of these things, because it lends credibility.
Credence to you,
yeah,
in a sense.
yeah,
and to your rule, right?
That's right.
So it's sort of like I have the right to rule now because my ancestry or my lineage, in a sense, goes back to these great kings.
It's no different than today, right? I mean, we see this today in the Arab-Israeli conflict, right? Claims to the land, and talking about who was here first, right? I mean, that's like who has the most, who can reach back the furthest. I mean, that's overly simplistic, but that's certainly an aspect of being able to go back. And so I think recognizing that, making these types of connections to earlier texts and earlier traditions is actually really, really important.
Sorry about that, guys.
No worries.
Everything okay?
No,
Ish.
but it's temporarily okay again. It was a quick temp fix. So
okay, that's good to hear. Obviously, safety is first. So if anything happens,
it'll require another one in about 20 minutes or so. But sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Josh.
No worries. It's cool.
Did you want me to try to answer that Indus Valley question real quick?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think that was a fantastic question that Johnny Spinoza stated. So please go ahead.
So I'll make it quick because I don't have a lot to say about it. But we know about trade between Mesopotamia, particularly in the south, and Indus Valley from definitely back in the fourth millennium. I want to say it. Does it go back into the fifth? I don't remember. But there's a great book. It's in the Mesopotamian Civilizations series. I'm tempted to go pull it off my shelf, but it's in the other room. But it has the Indus Valley in it, like maybe Mesopotamia and Indus Valley, but it's published by Eisenbrauns. So maybe somebody in the chat can grab it and throw the link in there. It's not a like a really long read, but it's really good because it talks about overland trade. It talks about like things like Malucha, and when you see things like Magan and if you read through some of those earlier texts, you see that, and it shows how sea trade went. It's really interesting. I remember reading it. It's been like 3 years since I've read it, but I read it right when it came out. So, but yeah, there are definitely connections there, and we see them, I think, in the mythology. We see them in the literary text talking about these lands off to the east. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely there.
Exactly. And I think I think I'm going way too back if I'm talking about the Axel period, so I'm not going to go towards that extent. But
I have a quick question for you, Dr. Josh, and this may have been answered while in my absence or before I left, and I just don't remember. But when you talk about the ancient Sumerian languages, the Sumerian language and Akkadian languages, the culture they derive from, was it a shared culture where they just spoke multiple languages and the language evolved, or were there two different cultures?
Yeah, this is like the $64,000 question, right? They call it the Sumerian question. So are we talking about, like, it's the whole do languages equal people question, in the same way that, like, do pots equal people? So when you see a pottery style that comes into the material, into the record, the archaeological record, material culture, like, does that mean a new ethnicity? Is it a new people? Whatever. Okay. With all that being said, I think that the current position is probably, not having read all the secondary literature on this, at least recently, I think that the argument would be that you do have a group of people coming in probably at the end of the fourth millennium, or like in the second half of the fourth millennium,
BC,
and they're bringing, that's right,
BC.
and they're BC, and they're bringing this language with them, and the problem. So the real problem with this is that when you have people living in the same region, I mean, we see it in the United States, right? People, like, ethnic markers flow. Mm-hmm. And, you definitely have ethnic markers that set certain groups apart, but then you have people coming into that ethnic group and they might not be, like, racially, or genetically from that group, but because they adopt those genetic markers for whatever reason, or social reasons, other reasons. But so there becomes this intermingling. So, like, the idea that we'd be able to tease out, okay, genetically, this is a Sumerian, and genetically, this is an Akkadian, I think we lose that very, very quickly in the third millennium.
Yeah, and just to give people some perspective of what would happen if we tried to do that today, like in the United States, I am African American, largely. I identify as African American, but if someone 100 years from now were to examine whatever DNA remains that they had, and they knew that I was placed in an African American culture, they would look at my DNA and they would see, 30% European Jewish. So does that mean they could come to all sorts of conclusions from that about the entire race if I was the only one they had DNA evidence of?
Very good point.
Or wrong. Like, like I'm thinking of Khalil, right? Here's a guy that
Muslim.
now he speaks Arabic,
Mhm.
or I mean, not speaks, but I mean, like, he's very in tune then with like Muslim culture, Arabic culture, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now, like, if people would, oh, well, because he's a Muslim, so he must be from the Middle East somewhere. I mean, it's like, no, that's not how that works, right? So languages don't equal people, ethnic markers don't equal people. Those things are very fluid, and that's why I think that Sumerian problem is the thorny one that it is, because it's so difficult to sort of tease out who's who, because is there really a thing of who's who?
This is not directly related. It's a little bit tangential, but kind of related. When you look back to these ancient cultures, and this kind of applies to both of you, when you look back to 4,000 BCE or 6,000 BCE, I mean, this would have been around the time when Moses supposedly, I think 4,000 BCE, when Moses was parting the Red Sea and all that sort of stuff. So the beginning of the Jewish traditions as far as the Judeo-Christian God goes, when you ask Christians anyway. So when you start seeing evidence of cultures that predate that, what is the response within the clergy, or within the biblical scholarly circles to that? Surely they have to know that theirs is not the oldest civilization, and yet that's what their book suggests. So how do they resolve that?
Josh, go ahead, Josh.
Oh, no. Please, you go first. You're the guest, and I'll come in from behind. Go ahead.
It's actually even worse, because it's like Moses, according to the biblical timeline, would have been 15th century BCE, right? So, I mean, we're talking about a time that, I mean, like, writing had been around for 1,700 years by the time that Moses would have, come on the scene.
That's right.
And yet they wrote nothing.
I mean, yeah, well, the problem, this is the real issue, right? When you go to the Hebrew Bible and you're reading it as a history book, I mean, if you're seeing it that way and you're viewing the text as the inspired, inerrant word of God, you're going to very, very quickly run into historical problems, just very, very quickly. Because, like, the Israelites don't exist. Like, we don't know anything about the Israelites existing until the very end of the 13th century. 1207 is the first time we have any mention of them. And it's in the Merneptah Stela. And what he says about them, he's gone into Canaan. So he's the Egyptian pharaoh. And he's firm. I mean, Egypt has been firmly in control of Canaan, of Palestine, the southern Levant there, for, I mean, quite some time. They've been taking slaves from there. They've been taking tribute from there. So it's, they've got forts that are established in there. They've turned it into two or three different provinces. In other words, Egypt is controlling Canaan quite well, right? Merneptah has to go up there because there's been some, like, rebellions, and so he's trying to bring it back under control. So it's sort of the beginning of the end, I think.
Even though it's not, Old Kingdom, I believe. Old or new?
That would have been the new. But I mean, it's like, I'm not an Egyptologist. It's like not my area of expertise or anything.
Work this out amongst yourselves, the two resident experts here. I'm just going to sit back and.
But the critical thing about the mention that you see in this stele is that he doesn't call them a nation, right? He refers to them as like a people. And there's, again, I don't read Egyptian, but there's, if you read through the scholars that talk about this, you'll see pretty quickly that it carries some significance. But the point is that they're a significant enough group that he mentions them, but they're not a significant enough group that they're like a nation.
They're not recognized. Right? Yeah,
exactly.
In the same way as the other people groups, right? And so I guess the point is that that's very problematic for the historicity of the biblical text. And this is why people have moved away from sort of the traditional date of the Exodus in the 15th century, and they've had to like really lower it down to
when you
like
say
the
people
13th century.
Have moved away. Who are you talking? Are you talking about the Jewish scholars and scholars?
Yes. So anybody that's mostly conservative Christian scholars. And the thing is, this is the other thing that I think is important to recognize. It's only a handful. Like they're evangelical scholars is who they are. Probably the most popular would be like James Hoffmeyer up at Trinity, if anybody knows that name. But he's made, and he's a brilliant scholar. And there's no question about it. He just has theological commitments, and I think they color some of the things that Kenneth Kitchen is another example, brilliant Egyptologist. But when it comes to the Exodus, makes them say some things that I think are just they wouldn't say if they didn't hold certain theological positions. But the reason that they've had to move that date down is because like we know what's going on in the 15th century, and it's not the Exodus, right? You can't escape from the land of Egypt
that is
to
true.
the land of Egypt, right? Because that's essentially what they'd be doing. I mean, 2.5, 3 million people leave a land controlled by Egypt to travel through the wilderness for 40 years to go into a land controlled by Egypt.
Well, and also that's not the biblical narrative, is that it wasn't controlled by Egypt, and
that's
reality,
right.
The historical record is that it was. So that in and of itself is a contradiction.
That's
exactly.
Right. That's right. Yeah, it's very problematic.
Yeah, and so and the reason I asked this is I'm looking at it from the perspective of Christian fundamentalism in America, which is beholden to this young earth that was started 6,000 years ago, where the first nation was Israel and the Israelites from Adam to Noah, Abraham, Moses, and all of them, and that's the chain of succession to Jesus, and that's clearly not what the historical record shows. And if they're educated on this, how do they reconcile that, or do they just ignore it?
I think like.
Go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
I think that it's the same thing like what Dr. Josh stated, is that these are actually very knowledgeable scholars, but the problem is that the biblical literature kind of clouds their mind if they are
tenured.
Yeah, well, not tenured, but if they are sort of rightist type Christians or fundamentalist Christians, there you go. So if that is the problem, then mostly everything they follow suit until it comes into a roadblock where it goes against the Bible itself. Then they start to twist the narrative in a way that actually benefits their thought process. So it's not that they're dumb or they're not good scholars. They're actually really good scholars. It's only when those roadblocks come in that they end up creating their own narrative, which then puts their own scholarship
into question
in a gray area, because you really can't pinpoint what they're trying to do.
I'll give a great example of it. So in Exodus 12:37, text talks about 600,000 fighting men, right? Men on foot that leave Egypt. And these are like men that are 20 years and older, right? So this doesn't count women and children. So if 600,000 fighting men are leaving in the Exodus, that's where this number, like 2.5 to 3 million people, comes from. And that's kind of conservative because you have to figure women and children. Well, like James Hoffmeyer will say, he's got a 2005 publication. I think actually even in his more recent one, in his 2021 publication, he says, well, that number is impossible. Like there's the estimated population of the land of Egypt during the New Kingdom was like 3 million people. So that's everybody. So you can't have 3 million people out of 3 million people walking out of Egypt, right? It just doesn't work that way. So he says this number is impossible, is what Josh is saying. Like, here's the roadblock. We have something that's like, it says 600,000 men. This is a problem. So what do you do? Well, you can say, like, I would say, well, this is a text that isn't historically reliable, right? It's written later. So they don't know the numbers, and they're using big numbers. That's what we say.
So they're exaggerating at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, it's more, it's a little more nuanced. It's a little more complicated than that, but they don't know the numbers. They don't, because these aren't eyewitness accounts, right? These are stories that are being written later. So what he does, and what other scholars, conservative scholars do, is they say, well, now maybe the word thousand, it's the Hebrew word elef, maybe that doesn't mean thousand. Because if you look in these other contexts, the word elef can mean like a tribe. It can mean like a leader of a bunch of people. It could be like a military unit, right? And so maybe that's what's going on here. So if we have 600 military units, well, that could really bring the number down. Okay. Lots of problems with this. In my opinion, innumerable problems with this. Not the least of which is we have 2 censuses that show up in the book of Numbers. One is taking at the beginning, like when they've just come out of Egypt, they do a census of all the fighting men 20 years and older. And at 40 years after they left, they do another one. And they lay out in Numbers chapter 1, they say, here are all the people based on their tribe. From the tribe of Naphtali, you have 46,300 men. From the tribe of Dan, you have 38,000. I'm making these numbers up, but it's like that.
Okay, I was about to say, what does that add up to?
It adds up to, and they tell you at the bottom, totaling 603,550 fighting men.
Yep.
Well, Exodus 12:37 says approximately, it uses the Hebrew preposition ka, which means like or approximately, 600,000. Then at the 40-year mark, it says they do another census, same thing, 20 men 20 years older. And they're doing it for tax purposes, by the way, which is another part of this. And at the 40-year mark, they tally everybody up. They show all the different tribes and how much from each one. Some numbers have gone up in a tribe. Some numbers have gone down in another tribe. But they total 601,000, like 300 something. In other words, it's not 603,550. It's not 600,000. It's like 601 something and some change. So this is not just an arbitrary number that's being pulled. They're pulling it from the census, right? So anyway, the point is that no, it means 600,000. That's what it means, right? So these are just apologetics. They're apologetics because if that's an inerrant, inspired text, and that number there, if that line of text means what it says, and it says 600,000, it's an impossible number.
And I think that argument, that apologetics argument, is problematic for other areas of scripture as well. Because if you're going to say that the word thousand also means, brigade or nation or whatever you want to call it, if it has all these other meanings, well, now you can't trust that Jesus fed the 5,000. Maybe he only fed 8 leaders.
Yeah, this is
how do you determine when it's 1,000 and when 1,000 means 1,000 and when it means something else?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like apologetics. I mean, again, Lester Graby can be very fiery, right? He's a great scholar, and I love him. He could be a little pointed, but he said it so well in this 1987 article that's buried in an edited volume. he said, he's talking about fundamentalism, but it applies just as well for Christian apologetics. Fundamentalism can never be wrong, right? It's never looking for answers because it already has them, right? And if it has, I'm paraphrasing, he says, if it has evidence that supports its conclusion, it uses it. If it doesn't have evidence to support it, it postulates that evidence will someday come to light. If it has evidence to the contrary, it twists and distorts it to make it fit its position.
That's exactly what I did when I was an apologist. And when I realized what I was doing, that's what started my deconversion. I realized I'm not really looking for the truth. I've already decided what the truth was.
Yes.
I'm looking for arguments to make reality comport to what I'm calling truth.
Exactly.
And that's what being an apologist is. You've begun with certain presuppositions. You have a certain reading or a certain interpretation of scripture that you've accepted. And therefore that is true. So when you're confronted with science and history and all these other things, now you're trying to figure out a way to make it fit, and you're finding interpretations of all these things to where it can allow for the Bible to be true. You're not testing any of your own.
Right on that.
Yeah, you're not testing any of your own presuppositions. You're not testing any of the claims that you're beholding to. You're just accepting them.
Exactly.
So,
if I could, because I was talking to somebody last night, and they brought up a really good point, and it sort of made me think about this analogy a little bit more that I've used before. And there's an analogy that I have it in the book, actually, where I talk about methodologies for interpreting the biblical text. And if you have a criminal investigator, right, on the police force, and he finds out that Frank Smith has been murdered, and he goes and he looks at the evidence and he says, I think Bobby Joe killed Frank Smith. And he starts down the path of investigating Bobby Joe. And after a little while, he finds evidence that almost certainly clears Bobby Joe. He doesn't have the means. He doesn't have the motive. He doesn't have the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it comes to light that Jimmy Nelson actually is the one. Like there's positive evidence that suggests that Jimmy Nelson killed the person. I can't remember the name that I gave them. If that investigator kept investigating the first suspect who'd been cleared, essentially, trying to theorize hypothetical ways that maybe he could have done it, right? Maybe he's got a twin. Maybe he was in space and came back right at the opportune moment and materialized. That person would be taken off the case. Right. However, and as well he should, because his position there is to objectively come to the evidence. However, if that person that was being accused of murder, if it was their wife, and you went to them and said, hey, we've got evidence that shows your husband killed. Here's a video of him walking into this building and nobody else goes into this building at the same time. Like his wife, or somebody close to him, might think, I know Frank. There's no way that Frank would have killed anyone. There must be some other explanation. Well, I think that would be unwise, but I don't think it would be inconsistent.
No.
And I don't think there would be anything, in a certain respect, I don't think there would be anything wrong with that. What I would just say is that person would not be a reliable source for objective information.
No,
exactly.
They have a clear bias.
Yeah. I think we need to make that distinction in these discussions, because while I think that James Hoffmeyer, the Egyptologist, as a believer, is perfectly justified from a faith position to postulate things like maybe LF means military unit and that lets this work, fine. But he can't do it as an investigator. When he does it as an investigator, as a professional who's supposed to be coming at this objectively, that's when I think it's problematic.
I completely agree with you. I agree. Like nobody's saying that people can't postulate over things or whatever. And that's how sometimes we even come up with our theories, is through postulation outside of the field itself and wondering how these things came to be in the first place. But at the same time, you need to have the hands-on experience as well. So you can have postulations, but if you're not part of the actual expedition, let's just say, or even if you are, but you're utilizing bias information in order to change the narrative of something, that's where I think we run into an issue. And let alone because this individual is also somebody who is giving not forums, but discussing this type of information with the general public as well. And I think that's where the issue runs. Because if you're not giving the public the right information in order for it to utilize and actually see what we can build up as somewhat of a truth, because can we really see what really happened during these times? It is difficult to do so.
I have a little bit of a difference of opinion with both of you, mostly you, Dr. Josh, in the sense that I agreed with the second part of what you just said about how the investigator has to be unbiased and you can't obviously take your biases into an investigation. The first part where the person is justified under faith to come to the conclusion that they do, I think I can hear myself in an echo. Okay, it stopped.
Most probably.
That was weird. Yeah. No, I think where I was going with that was to say, I'm not sure if that person is justified. It's certainly
Justified's not the right word. Yeah.
Yeah. And because I say this as someone who's always looking for the truth. I mean, again, if you're coming from a faith-based position and you're not sure, you're actually investigating to confirm either your faith or to try to find evidence against it. If you're doing it honestly, you shouldn't be looking to confirm the thing that you believe. You should be looking to falsify it to give you justification for believing it, right? So, but so many people who come from a faith-based position, if I can speak, they do the opposite. They only look for evidence to confirm what they believe and reject all evidence that contradicts what they believe. So that means that you're not really looking for the truth. You've decided what the truth is, and you're looking for arguments to support your
right. And if getting to the truth of the matter, if you're interested in getting to the data points, the facts, and creating a good interpretive model, then yes, I think that's absolutely correct. However, for like a wife who is trying to believe that her husband didn't do this thing, that might not be her goal.
That's an emotional argument. She is being affected by emotions. She wants evidence for the thing that she believes because she wants to believe that.
So it's consistent and coherent, I think. And I don't think that it's right. But I don't think I would say it's like irrational in the sense of, well, I don't know. I'm not a philosopher, so maybe I'm using that word incorrectly in this context. But
I would say it is the consistent. It is the expectation. It is what we ought to expect from human behavior. People seeking to confirm their own biases, which is why we tend to remove biased people from the investigatory process so that we don't have that. Take no biases with you. Remove emotions, look just the science, science is objective in the sense that you're trying to falsify things before you accept them. Religion is not objective in that you are have a belief and you're looking for evidence to confirm. You're leading the evidence to where you want it to go.
And there are some circumstances in life. I think that we're getting off topic. I'm sorry, I'm taking us off topic. Yeah. But I'll just say this: like, I think there are circumstances where maybe getting to the truth of things isn't really the most important thing. For example, I'm very glad that Megan isn't always focused or trying to dig down into the details about like how I smell or how I look, right? There are times that she allows those rose-colored glasses to filter some of those things out. She makes she lets some confirmation bias, I guess, because she's just looking for things. And that keeps her in a more affectionate, I don't know,
it facilitates the continuance of the relationship.
Right. So in that sense, that's more important than her being honest and saying, Josh actually smells really bad right now. He needs to go shower. And so like, I'm going to embrace that and really, face that fact. And I'm glad that she sometimes sets that to the side, has that confirmation. Josh actually smells really great, anyway. Okay.
Right. I don't know how much longer you guys want to go. I have to go right now because I am in one of those it's time to clean up the water again situation. So do you want to carry on here, Josh the Archon, or do you want to move?
I'm perfectly fine. If Dr. Josh is good for going a bit longer on this, I
got a few more minutes.
Well. I love this. I love these type of conversations.
I'm going to say my goodbyes to everyone in the audience and also to the lovely Dr. Josh, who's going to continue with his education on ancient Sumerian and Akkadian languages and the culture it spawned from and what we know about it and what we don't know with Josh, the archaeologist. So you guys take care, enjoy the rest of the show, and I will see you next time.
Thanks,
Have a great one, Bryce, and be safe, my friend.
I'll try. It's a struggle here. The struggle is real. But take care.
All right, have a good one. But yeah, I completely agree with what you're stating. I think that you're absolutely right, that there are people who do have biases. And I saw a comment in the comment section beforehand that stated from S.J. Tomlinson that stated atheists do that too, in a sense. They look for evidence to confirm their non-belief in God, and they'll accept the craziest notions against God. So I have obviously issues and contention with that, obviously, but at the same time, I do see where he's coming from because I have spoken with and heard certain atheists speak. Yeah. And I wish that I can be there to kind of help them out through the situation, because there are certain atheists that will state, well, the Israelites borrowed from Buddha. Not Israelites. My apologies. The Christians borrowed from Buddhists or whatever. Jesus borrowed from the Buddhist faith. And I'm kind of looking at them like, I'm not saying that the possibility isn't there. I'm just saying that that's one hell of a way to make it from point A to point B to a particular individual or whatever. And let alone, you're stating that the only person who can have these thoughts were the Buddha himself. And nobody else in civilization could have peaceful thought processes or anything like that, which in a sense, I find that kind of ridiculous and so kind of self-defeating if you're going to use that as an argument. So I do kind of agree with what he stated. However, when we're looking at particular individuals who are looking at the evidence that's before them through a non-biased lens, and that's the thing that archaeologists do, or try to do at least, is look through things through a non-biased lens in order to really find the truth or get to the bottom of the situation. How did this civilization come to be? How did it thrive? What was its way of connecting with each other? And so on and so forth. And from there, you can build a succinct understanding based on their cultural identities, in a sense, the way that they ate, the way that they actually prayed and practiced their faith, and so on and so forth. And then you can see that somewhat, obviously, through different refurbishings, but passed down the line in a sense within the general region. I'm not saying like halfway across the world or something that people are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So I do see what he's stating. I just think that what he's stating is kind of misconceived as well, because I think he's trying to lump in all atheists together, and I don't find that that's actually right. And not right, but I don't think it's realistic to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, we all like the idea that any of us don't have to wrestle with confirmation bias, I think is just silly, right? We all do.
Agreed.
So I agree with SJ completely on that. And I mean, like, it's not just in these like religious settings or theological settings or whatever. Like when I wrote my dissertation, I had to make an argument at the end, and it's like, okay, I think that the reason that these MSL liturgical texts that are written in unorthographic Sumerian are written this way is because I think practitioners and performers that don't speak Sumerian are utilizing them to either speak them out loud or to themselves. If nobody knows what that means, that's absolutely fine. Get my book and you will. But the point is that, here I've spent 4 years plus writing this, thing, doing this research and coming up with this conclusion. And like, you want it to be right? So then, if you find another tablet that's written in the same style, the first thing you do is you look at it, not to prove your thing wrong. Like, you're like, does it work? Does it work? So
is there a correlation between the two?
Yeah, I mean, it's what you're looking for, right? So that's the struggle, and everybody deals with that. Everybody deals with it.
Absolutely.
So I think SJ is absolutely. We all have to come to, as much as we can, we have to come to all of these contentious things with as much of an open mind as we can, and say, all right, look, it's impossible to come to this objectively, completely objectively. That's not going to happen, right? I don't think.
I'm in agreement with you on that.
but we gotta try to fight the confirmation bias. We have to try to say, all right, what are the best arguments against our position? And let's not bring up the best arguments against our position just so we can lay them out to topple them over. But let's see what those arguments are so that we can really think them through and say, is it possible that that's the case, right? And I think that's the goal. Anyway, that needs to be the goal.
I completely agree. And I think that as soon as you let bias get in your way, that's where your work flounders, in a sense.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
Now you're clouded by that set biases, and now you're going to create works that are not really aiming for what the data shows, but what you are looking for.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's the major issue that I think everybody, as you stated very eloquently, everybody needs to be aware of that. It's not just theists and it's not just atheists. It's everybody.
Yeah, agreed.
Absolutely. But now for the actual learning the Sumerian, because that's something that I'm very interested in. Like, how does one actually learn, or how did we come to the notion of what Sumerians tried to say or were trying to portray within these literatures that they had?
Yeah, I mean, so the actual way that Sumerian was worked out, obviously, I mean, we're still working it out. It's there's still lots of articles that get written. I mean, you could see in even in like Hebrew biblical studies, you'll see this particular verbal form actually has this nuanced meaning or something. So how much more so with Sumerian? So there are lots of things, like when I wrote when Megan and I wrote this volume 1 to this Sumerian grammar, there are things that we're just trying to present what everybody agrees on, but there are lots of things that people don't agree on.
Right.
So the interesting thing about Sumerian is it's written in cuneiform. It is obviously not the only language that utilizes cuneiform to write it, but cuneiform is the script. So just for everybody in the audience, this is, don't laugh. This is a I went and got some skull pay when I first started up at Hopkins, and I put together my first tablet, and I still have it. So
that's awesome.
Can you see that? Those wedges that are in there. I don't know if you can see that, but that's cuneiform.
That's really cool. You made that yourself.
Yeah. Now there are much better. To show you the difference between somebody that, so this was before I'd taken a lot of Sumerian. I'd taken any classes. I mean, you could see it's thin. This is made by a professional. His name's Jeremiah Peterson. He's a Sumerologist and Assyriologist, but he made that bad boy. This is an amulet, and it's almost a perfect, I would say it's damn close, perfect replica of an amulet that you can see the hole in the side.
Right.
That they would have put a string or something through to wear it around the neck. It was a protective amulet. But anyway, he has an Etsy shop, by the way. Jeremiah Peterson is his name, and he made us. This was a birthday present of mine. Sorry, it's like show and tell now.
Oh, no worries. I love this. Please.
But this is trying to see if you guys can see this.
That's awesome.
So this is it's heavy. This is a weapon. But he made that. And fired it and everything. Okay. So cuneiform is written where you take the tablet in your hand like this, and you have a stylus, sort of something with a sharp edge, and you're impressing the wedges. You're pushing the wedges into the soft clay to form these different cuneiform shapes, so wedge-shaped writing. And it's not alphabetic. Now, there is an alphabetic cuneiform script, and it's used to write Ugaritic, but that's much later. That's like 13th century BCE. But, Sumerian and then Akkadian, of course, Hittite. There are lots of languages that utilize the cuneiform writing, the script. But it's not alphabetic in that, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but it's syllabic. So each cuneiform sign has a phonetic value, a syllabic value. So one sign would be like ba, then the next sign would be on, and the next sign would be do. So ba, on, do, if you wanted to write the word bandu, right? You could use 3 different signs, and so that's how it works. It's a little more complicated than that, in that different signs can have different functions. So a Sumerian sign itself could just be a word. And this is maybe important to talk about. So what's a good example? Okay. There's a star sign. Actually, I think it's on here. Yep, the very first one. Actually, Megan has a beautiful drawing of it here in the book, and it's much easier to see. So,
okay.
So that right in the middle, right there, that sign looks like a star.
Yeah.
That's called the Dinger sign. And the Dinger sign is it's used to it can represent the word on, the Sumerian word on, which means heaven or sky. It can mean dinger, which is the word for God. And so that sign, if you just see it by itself, it can mean on, sky, right?
Right.
However, they realized that they're using words, they're using individual signs to represent different commodities, for example, in these early texts. Well, you can only get so far writing nouns, right?
Right.
Just
Oh, yeah.
and then numbers, wedges for numbers. They realized that because they're speaking Sumerian, they're speaking this language. Well, if they wanted to write the word Bandu, they could use the sign for sky, which is the word on,
Right.
and they could use it phonetically. So they would write ba on do. Now, on in that wouldn't mean sky. It would just be for the value, its phonetic value on. And an example that I give is if I had to go write my name for a graduation ceremony for somebody to pronounce my name, I might write Joshua as JAH dash SHOE dash WAH, Joshua.
Oh, wow.
Well, the word shoe there, SHOE, wouldn't mean footwear, right? You wouldn't be able to say something my name has to do with footwear. No, I'm just using shoe for its phonetic value. And that's what's happening. So that's called the rebus principle.
Huh.
That's what they realize. Oh my gosh, we can use these nouns, these words that have these phonetic values, but just use the phonetic value separate from the actual meaning. And so that's how the writing system developed.
That's actually really cool. So instead, they utilize already words in a sense. And what they did was utilize, as you stated, the phonetic usages of those words in order to create either like a name or a thing or something towards that.
That's
extent.
right.
That is really awesome. I didn't know this.
So if anybody's interested in this, so again, the book that we're using is the one that's on the screen.
Yes.
But Oz over on Atheist Network Group asked me if I would come on. Oh, thank you, Wes.
Thank you very much, Wes.
If I could come on Sundays and teach Sumerian using that book. So we started the series for real. I think this past Sunday, lesson 2 is this Sunday coming up. But I'm just going through the book and I'm teaching. You're watching me teach Oz Sumerian. That's what's happening. And I have a whiteboard that an electronic whiteboard that I have come up on the screen on my iPad. And so it's a lot of fun. But if people are interested in learning, learning to read some Sumerian, and the cool thing about it is the book. If you want, I'll just read a little section of it.
Please go ahead.
You can hear how it's written. But by the end of the book, you will be able to read stuff like that, like without a lot of difficulty, actually, which is pretty cool. But we wrote this book because there are several other very good Sumerian grammars out there, but it's sort of like if you don't know English and you pick up like a 9th grade English grammar book, you're not really. It's going to be really hard to learn English like that. Yeah. You need something really basic. So that's what we did. So like here, I'll pick one that. Okay, case endings. This is actually kind of a complicated thing in Sumerian.
Okay.
But here's how I present it, and I'll just to give everybody an idea. So they're not scared off.
Understood.
When you read the sentence, Johnny hit the ball over the fence, how do you know who the subject is? What about the direct object? How can you tell where the direct object went? What if I interpreted that sentence? The fence hit Johnny so hard that he went right over the ball. Crazy, right? And how do we know that it would be silly to interpret the English sentence that way? Because English has markers that tell us how each word is functioning in the sentence. For example, we know that Johnny is the subject of the sentence because it comes before the verb. We know that the ball is the direct object because it comes right after the verb. But what about the fence? Doesn't it come after the verb too? Yes, but it is marked by a separate word that tells you what role it plays in the sentence. Over. In other words, things like word order and prepositions tell us what the words and phrases in English sentences are doing. But how do they do it in Sumerian? Well, we have already seen that at least one of these markers tells us how a noun is functioning in the sentence, the genitive, and we talked about that in the previous chapter. We call this marker a case marker or a case ending. Some of the most common case endings are prepositions. Now, we use prepositions all the time. I am going to the store. This package came from the post office. Will you come with me to the game? In English, prepositions are individual words that appear before the nouns that they govern, that is, in the house, for example. In Sumerian, however, prepositions are endings that are attached to the nouns, just like the genitive case ending, ak, which is what you learned about in the previous chapter. In the same way as the genitive, you translate the preposition before the word that it is attached to. For example, the ending she means to or towards. The form a2 means house, she, so a2 she, with a2 meaning house, would be translated to the house. And then I give a list of prepositions. But that's the way the book sort of goes. It's written at a very, very introductory, very basic. It assumes that you know how to speak English, but you might not know what all the grammatical words are or whatever. So
I think that's a really good way of doing it, though, because it kind of, as you stated, it doesn't scare somebody away from it. It's
right.
kind of introducing them to it so that they gain an interest of it and then wants to learn more later on down the line. I think that was a really good way of doing it.
It seems like it's been pretty popular. People seem to like it. So that's volume 1. I'm writing 2 books at the moment. I'm writing volume 2 of the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, and then I'm writing volume 2, my part of volume 2 of the Sumerian grammar. Then I can hand it off to Megan, and she does her half of the work. But so that one should come out next year. Ooh. So both of those books will actually come out next year. So
do you mind? Oh no, that's true. I don't want you to spoil anything. So never mind. I was gonna kind of go in a little bit of more detail, but I don't want you to spoil your books. I want them.
Oh no, it's fine. I can at least give general stuff about them. Sure.
Oh really? Okay. Because what I was gonna state is this second book of Sumerian, How to Read Sumerian, is this more of like an adept take on it, or is it still the same way, but we're just gonna maybe throw in a little more complicated words into it? Okay, perfect.
So for a good example, a good analogy to this would be the plural in English, right? Okay. So if I were writing this level book in English, I would say, okay, we're going to talk about how words are made into the plural.
Okay.
So if you want to turn a word into a plural, you put an S at the end. Right. And then I might say, now there might be some cases where depending on the last letter of the word, you have to put an ES. But S or ES. Now you might say, Josh, there are all kinds of different ways that you can make words. So there are all kinds of these irregular plurals. We're not going to worry about that in book 1. Okay. Let everybody get all the basic stuff, the stuff that's really, really common, the stuff they're going to see all the time. Get that stuff down. Then in book 2, we go back over the same topics So in book 1, there's a section on the plural. In book 2, there's a section on the plural. And we say, now you remember from volume 1, we talked about, so in Sumerian, you write ene for the plural. But that's not always what you do. And there are different ways that you can make the plural. So in book 2, we go a little more complicated. So actually, if you remember in English, I said that you could do S or ES, and that's how you make the plural. But that's not always true. Sometimes you have these more complicated words like ox goes to oxen, right? And goose goes to geese. And, then you would deal with that. But you don't want to put all of that on the student at once.
Right. Because then it gets overwhelmed.
That's right.
You don't want to overwhelm the student in a way that they don't want to continue the process. You want them to be interested in the process to begin with, or at least have an interest in it. Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. And I really do think. Sorry,
if you look in the side chat, like Wes is tearing it up. He's getting his Sumerian down.
Oh, okay. Wes is killing it at the moment. Good job, Wes.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. It's perfect. It's perfect. I think seriously, I'm going to even stop over
Awesome.
on Sundays and listen to you sort of teach Oz how to do that. Or how to speak Sumerian. And then after, I'll try to take tips from that as well. Because I really do think that it's an extremely interesting language and an extremely interesting dead language that I would really love to know, in a sense.
Yeah. And I think the nice thing about this is that, so the book originated, like it came from when we first started the channel. I thought, well, gosh, I thought, well, gosh, I've spent all this time learning Sumerian, right? I should at least put a little goofy series up on our channel that, if there are 3 people in the world that care about that, that they'll do, because I didn't think anybody'd be interested in learning Sumerian.
Really?
Even though I think it's really awesome. Yeah, so we put up this video series.
Okay.
I think there are 10 or 11 lessons. They're all free. You can go watch them. And they cover most of what's in the book. The book has some additional exercises, some additional material in the chapters themselves, but it's basically the same material. That series is by probably a factor of 10, the most popular series on our channel.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
I think the first video has been viewed 115,000 times, I think. Like, that blew me away. So we said, well, gosh, if people are this interested in the videos, we should probably put a book together. And it's been pretty popular. So yeah, but that's the nice thing about these, is that you've got the video series for free, and it'll teach you. Then you can get the book, which I obviously recommend, because I think it's easier for me to learn from a book. But then you can either come live and ask your questions and interact and that sort of thing, or it's there later, so you can go watch somebody learn the language, and you can take your time with it. So anyway, I'm excited about it, and it's cool to interact with Oz like that, because he's such a cool guy. So.
Oh yeah, he's an amazing person. I love sometimes when he does come on and stuff, and when I do go into the after parties afterwards, because it's amazing just interacting with an individual such as he and everybody else. I'm not gonna lie, and there's a lot of cool people within the actual after party chat as well. But no, that's actually really interesting to see that, like, the humble beginnings of where the book kind of originated from, and how beforehand it was kind of like, I'm not sure if people are even gonna reach for this, and then having 100,000 views on that one video, on the first video, that's really impressive, and I'm actually happy that people want to take that initiative.
It's funny, like, I remember writing my part of book 1. I wrote it, so I have a full-time job, and at that time it was an hour drive away,
Right.
So I would get up at 4 a.m. and I'd get dressed, and I'd drive to Starbucks, which is about 10 minutes away. So I get there at 4:30, right when they open. And the barista would have my coffee, and I got one of those sausage, egg, and cheese biscuits or sandwiches every morning. He'd have it ready, set it there in front of me. And I would sit there for an hour and write. I'd do my research and I'd write. And I think it took me 3 or 4 months to write the book. But, I'm writing it. It was like, this is so funny because, I mean, it's cool. It'll be cool. I have a book that I could put up on the shelf. Ooh, But, my mom will buy 10 copies, and that'll be the best-selling part of it, right?
Right.
But yeah, it was cool. It's cool. Megan made this book.
Right.
I don't know. I think that the really cool thing that it is, she really made it a lot more interesting.
She's like the editor in a sense. So
Definitely.
while you write, she kind of like edits and goes through and corrects.
But she added a lot of exercises. She added all the hand copies.
Oh,
like
wow.
she said, you should probably develop this aspect over here. So I mean, she was very substantial what she did. But one of the other things that we do is, if you've ever learned like a foreign language and they give you exercises in the book, they'll give you an answer key in the back. But a lot of times what I found lacking in particularly ancient languages, their answer keys, is they'll give you the answer, but they often don't explain why. So
yes.
I said, all right, well, I'm going to do little explanations. So for example, here, I'm just flipped open to exercise 11, or lesson 11, exercise 1. I have the Sumerian, and then I have how it's normalized, and then I have the translation. And then the paragraph underneath of it says, the imperative form of do 11, which is the verb, shows the expected G of the auslaut for do 11, followed by an A vowel representing I3, or E3, and the B from the third inanimate object. So it's explaining the answer. How did we get there? Which I would have loved to have had when I was learning Sumerian, because it's like, all right, why is that B there? I mean, I know I got the right answer, but I don't know exactly why I put that B there. So hopefully that makes it more useful.
It's like learning French for me, because learning French is extremely difficult, and sometimes there's just no rhyme or reason to why something is ou eh. It sounds the same, but there really isn't a rhyme or reason why you have those particular two. Why is one feminine and why is one masculine?
Yeah,
it's
right.
Absolutely insane. But at the same time, I guess that also carries over to Sumerian as well, because you want to know why something does what it does.
Yes,
why does this
particular
exactly vowel, or why does this particular noun written in this particular way?
Yep, that's right.
And I think that's the best way of doing it, because it really gives you the ground up experience of how to actually learn something, rather than sink or swim. Here it is, but sink or swim.
Right. Right.
Figure it out.
Well, I mean, I think that the nice thing about it, and I want to comment on Wes's comment there about Megan, because I think he's absolutely right. But like, the book is designed for you to learn by yourself. And that's the big difference, that I think most of these other grammars don't work that way. They're anticipating that you're going to have a professor there with you that knows Sumerian, saying, all right, let me walk you through this. But you guys definitely should, absolutely should have Megan on. So Megan has 2 master's degrees in ancient Near Eastern studies, one from Birmingham out in the UK, and then one from Johns Hopkins. And she is what we call all but dissertation. And what that means is, so she finished all of her coursework, took her comprehensive exams, and she's done all of the doctoral work. And she actually had like 3.5 chapters of her dissertation written.
Oh.
And she had to stop because of the kids.
Right.
Which sucked. But it was the right decision for her. She's much happier. And she's going to go back. That's the thing.
Okay.
She's going to go back and finish once the kids are grown. But Megan is definitely the better looking, smarter part of this relationship. There's no question about it.
Seriously, I would love to have both of you. I would love to have her on, but I would love to, because I think that you both have a great dynamic with each other. Yeah. I have watched the show before, the Hammurabi, Digital Hammurabi show that you have. Yeah. And it seems that you both work in tandem with each other, and I love that relationship. And I would love to have both of you on if you have the time. Obviously, I know love you to. Got.
Yeah.
Okay.
Love to help out. Yep. But I probably, speaking of her, I probably should head up there soon, just because I know she's got the twins, and hopefully she's not thinking, why did I say that he could do this tonight? Why did I say that?
Right. No, I'm even getting that death eyes from halfway across the room. So I understand what you mean. But seriously, it's so great to have you on. I love having you on this show. There's so much. I learned so much more about Sumerian and Akkadian just from having you on, and just Mesopotamia in general. And I love that aspect. So thank you so much. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything that you want to state to the audience before we leave? Or
oh no, I love you guys. I love this audience. I love you guys. And this is my pleasure to be on here. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, it's just, we have such a great community. We have such a great community. I love it.
I'm seriously, this is why I do it, is because, or I love making YouTube content, is because I'm interacting with the community itself. And that's the thing that I love, is that I'm already in university studying based on archaeology and even paleontology now that I'm moving into that. And what I want is to try to help educate people in that manner, in a sense, and not educate like they don't know anything about it, but just make it fun. Because a lot of people, when they go into university, they're kind of like, oh man, you're literally writing the entire time, and everything is just a drone on and on if you don't have the right professor, obviously.
Right.
But I would love to have these type of conversations with the audience, so that we can answer questions that the audience may have, and to enlighten the audience on specific aspects of our general fields and stuff. And I think that's what really does it for me, is to this experience, and also talking with individuals such as yourself, which enlighten me on matters that I have no idea about. You know, like with Mesopotamia, like I love reading about Mesopotamia. But the thing is that I never had hands-on work in that area. So you would have more knowledge in that aspect than I would. And I always love to just listen and hear what professionals have to on their field, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So again, I thank you so much for coming on. It's been an enlightening conversation, a great conversation. I hope to have you back on again in the future.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Absolutely. All right, guys. And for me, there's not really much for me to bring up right now. We're still in the beginning phases of the Promethean secular frontier. But I do hope in the future that we can contribute more to the community and just help out people. That's the number one thing that I always want to do, is just help people that want to learn, help people that are in dire situations, help people who are trying to come out of religion, but they're afraid to do so. I want to give that sense of community to them and grow from there. And that's what we're trying to do at the Promethean Secular Frontier, is just helping individuals grow. So again, thank you all so much for coming and supporting us in the Promethean Secular Frontier. Again, thank you so much for our esteemed guest coming on here, Dr. Joshua Bowen. Thank you so much. And I will see you all next Wednesday, actually, because Monday we're not having a show. So next Wednesday, I will see you, and we're going to have a conversation on Star Trek. So please, if you love Star Trek, come on by, and we're going to have a great conversation on that. All right.